Hello, everyone, and welcome to Maybe Muslim. I'm Mariam Heather, producer and host of the podcast, and in this conversation, I am joined by Sabah Khan, co founder of Parcham, a Mumbai based feminist organization that champions inclusion, diversity, and equality within the society. For more than a decade, Parcham has been running a football program that trains girls from marginalized communities and different religious backgrounds to become footballers and coaches. Their football program began in Mumbra, a predominantly Muslim ghetto on the outskirts of Mumbai, and over the years has expanded across different suburban areas of the metropolis. Through this football initiative, Parcham has helped girls tackle conservatism and orthodoxy within their families and communities, and at the same time enable them to reclaim public spaces for themselves. In this episode, Sabah shares her own journey growing up in a ghetto, the impact of the 1992-93 anti-Muslim violence in Mumbai on her, reasons for starting Parcham, and the journey of young Muslim female footballers over the years. We discuss how these girls often had to fight for their interest in sports with their families, tackle sexism at home and on ground, how mothers and fathers have come around and supported many on their football journeys, and what more needs to be done to support them build their lives around a sport that they have come to love. Hi Sabah, how are you? Welcome to Maybe Muslim.
Thank you, Mariam, and so happy to be on this podcast here.
It's an absolute privilege to have you and to speak to you about your work and the work you do with Parcham. Um,
Thank you.
Maybe we can start with your formative years, growing up in India, and how has the experiences of living as a Muslim in the country shaped your understanding of modern day India and the work you do with Parcham?
Well, if I was to start, meaning I grew up in a Muslim ghetto in Bombay, in Madanpura. And meaning it was a low middle class neighborhood. My mom was a teacher, so I had both parents working, and I think that really helped to see this woman who was so important in my life actually going out there and working to sustain the family. Yeah, so that helped. But in this Muslim ghetto that we were in, it there were all these friends that one was surrounded by who were very Muslim, and we all were Muslim then, right? And that what was being Muslim? Muslim was being, waking up during Ramzan, doing your sehri, and then praying and iftari. So that meant being Muslim. That was it. It was celebrating together, being religious together, whatever that religion was. Okay, meaning one just followed the rituals and considered oneself a Muslim with them. And but the peer pressure ensured that you followed the rituals, that there was no backing out, there was no not fasting a day. It was really shameful if you didn't do that. So we managed to get through that. We played together. But at that point in time, meaning because now I'm reflecting on my growing up, I realized that we were all these girls would just be playing hopscotch and these really silly games, and the boys were never around, and we were friends with them, but we weren't really playing with them. And it's now that I reflect that our play spaces was so segregated. And when we played, and if we were playing in the evening, there was this one man in our neighborhood who what walked past us muttering Lahore under his breath. Okay, meaning so. Then we thought it was funny that why is he reading out these prayers, and we would laugh, and as soon as he would pass by, we would mutter the whole prayer. But now I think, like, what about women's happiness, or even the innocence of girls playing can make one think of the devil and wanting to do away with it, right? So yeah, so that was growing up. Also, that in this neighborhood, my mom was a teacher, and so for our family, education was really important. And our parents constantly were, that see, we you have nothing, you're going to inherit nothing, so all that you will have is what you build, and you better be, having a good education to make something of your life. And of course, meaning you have to be the best. So it was drilled that so you could never do anything you were not good at, because then there was shame that, how could you not excel at this. So it was always, it was always education. And I was a really puny little creature then. I would never get picked up in sports. And oh my god, they were really nasty, my teachers. And it was always so much competition, I could never play. So then I concentrated on education, and I think it was the same for my siblings as well. But we did well in our studies, and my parents were really proud, because that was the intent, that if you want to get better in life, you need good education, and meaning they thought this was the only way out to a better life. So we did that. But I think that through that I also learned that, perfection is not really such a good thing, because it keeps you from doing so much. Because anytime you think you'll fail, you don't even attempt it. So that is now the recognition that has stopped me from doing so many things. And so I think that Parcham I try to remember that when I'm kind of thinking of the programs. But meaning, as growing up, then 90 to 93 happened, and I think that any Muslim you will speak to of my generation will bring the fact that 92 and 93 riots have really shaped their understanding of being Muslim in this country. So during the riots, by then we had moved out to another neighborhood, which was a mixed neighborhood, still had a lot more Muslims, but it was still mixed, this housing society, nearly 400 households. But it had Christians and Sikhs and Hindus and Muslims. And that's when the riots happened. And I remember us staying up all night, with boiling water, and just prepared for what might happen. But like I said, that education being so important, my brother was in VJTI then, and he had exams on the 9th of December, and all the phone lines were disconnected, and there was no news happening. And it had taken so much effort for my brother to reach where he was. It did not occur to us that he could let go of that exam. And so my brother and my dad walked all the way from Kurla to VJTI, which is in Badala, which is around 10, 15 kilometers, in that violence. And we were really scared as to, what might happen on the way. Because a few hours later, we got news of one of our neighbor being shot by the police. And so my brother and father returned around evening, because it took that much time to walk, and walking back they had to hide many times. They witnessed a lot of violence on the way, and it really changed how one thought of this city, and how one thought of being Muslim. Though, earlier one was ritually a Muslim, but with this one also became politically a Muslim, one could say, of what was happening. It also changed many relationships, many friendships that one held dear, changed overnight with the riots, because there were friends who just shunned us. It was really, it was a terrible time to be in Bombay then, and to be a Muslim in Bombay then. Probably the Hindus also felt as insecure and as terrified, because I don't think any of us had expected this kind of violence in a city which is cosmopolitan. So yeah, so then that happened. And then we moved on with our lives. And yeah, so this memory of the 92 has also in many ways shaped the kind of work I decided to take on, because of the kind of hate that there was. And I would think that Parcham, so when I started Parcham, many a few of us friends actually got together, and we thought that we'd worked with women's organizations in the past. I had worked with Awaz in Iswa, meaning I had volunteered with Awaz in Iswa for more than a decade by then. If you know of Awaz in Iswa, it's a fairly radical Muslim women's group, which has been working with Muslim women on personal laws and other issues. So I'd worked with them for almost a decade. I'd worked with them in Mumra, and Mumra is this place where, post the 92 riots, Muslims who'd kind of lost their homes, had lost family members, had lost businesses, migrated to Mumra. So 92 is when there was this large scale migration to Mumra, which changed Mumra into a Muslim ghetto. So meaning, I think from a less than a lakh, suddenly the population increased to around 3 lakh post the 92 riots. So that was the place that I was working in. And so and there was this history of victimhood and other things in Mumra. And so then when we thought of Parcham, we thought, this is what we want to work on. That this city is now so neatly divided into ghettos where the Muslims and non-Muslims don't interact with each other. There is no need to interact with each other. That neighborhoods have become like these, self-sufficient pockets where you would probably go out for an education, but then you come back and you're amongst your own. And one needed to challenge that, because when you're amongst your own and you don't meet the other, every stereotype fed to you kind of just takes root. There's no way to challenge it. Like, how would I know what a Muslim is like? Because through my school I've never interacted with a non-Muslim. In Oftentimes you would go to a minority institution in college as well, where there would be a few non-Muslims, and it's a very superficial relationship that you end up having with them oftentimes. So there's no way of knowing. There's not enough time to build friendship. There's not enough people to challenge your opinion of them. And so Parcham was the idea to bring Muslims and non-Muslims together. And we used football again, because we felt that this is a great team game to get girls together. Also, it allows them to play. It challenges this whole stereotype that this hijabi Muslim girl is this oppressed little creature who cannot step out of the house, is imprisoned in it. So then to have to access public space to play, was something which uh, was mind boggling for people. They just couldn't imagine something like this in Mumra. And so we got a lot of press coverage. Everyone wrote about us. So yeah, so that's how. I hope I've answered.
You have. I was going through some of the points you were saying, and one of the most striking similarities I find between what I've read about the footballers of Parcham and your personal story is how, when you girls used to be playing hopscotch, there was this old man who would walk and just say Lahore. Yeah, and in the stories I've read of the Parcham girls, you can see that they have constantly had to fight this kind of male gaze, that they should not be in the places they are found, like a playground, like a sports field, like even the street. And I'm curious to know, how has that evolved over the years that Parcham has gotten more and more girls into the game of football? Have you found, as you interact with families, schools, administrations, that that sentiment, that male gaze is shifting, that they are understanding that what they're doing is objectifying, and that has evolved?
Well, I don't know if the men realized that they were objectifying girls. Meaning, but when I think the first day of our football training, I think that is something which is etched in memory, simply because it was so radical. And we started playing, and the girls who had come, they were all, meaning they were everyone in Mumra wears the hijab. I mean, very few who don't. And today, of course, you see some girls, walking around in their football kits as well. But at that point in time, everyone wore the hijab. So the girls had come in wearing the hijab, then they took off their burqa, but the dupatta stayed on. So then there was this struggle of, how do you keep your head covered and you keep your body covered? So, they tried all kinds of combinations with their dupatta. But anyways, they started, and but they were really stiff, because as soon as these men noticed that these girls are going to play, there was a mela surrounding us. There might be 100, 200 young boys and men who just stood gawking. So they just surrounded us, and the girls were playing, and they wouldn't run because they were so scared of their body moving, and men noticing, and constantly keeping the dupatta in place. So the first 10, 15 minutes was just about walking to the ball, kicking it lightly, and then moving around in that limited space. And after a point in time, they forgot. They just didn't care, and they just started playing, because that's what the game does to you. But the men stayed on for another couple weeks. So we practiced every Sunday. So they came the next Sunday as well, and then the third Sunday. And there were two of us, me and Akila, who's this other founder member. Our job was just to be policing the men, and fighting with them and threatening them with reporting to the police if they misbehave. But they managed. But after a while, there was no one. We were just playing. Nobody cared to give us a second glance. And today, meaning, we have fathers who come with us to the tournaments to watch their daughters play. We had this very interesting incident where we were at a tournament, and girls, because you kind of keep piercing your ears, and then there was this tiny wire in this girl's ear. And this father, who actually has a madrasa in UP, came with his daughter, and he sat there, and we said, this could result in injury. And he took a nail cutter and he clipped it off her ear. And we thought, oh my God, it's but I think that when you begin to initiate something, that's when change is possible, right? And people who you would not have imagined to behave in this particular fashion have also shifted in what they think their daughters should and shouldn't be doing. So in the same family, his other daughters were married by the time they were 17. And but with Shabnam, he is very clear that she should become financially independent, do what she likes, marries when she wants to. So there's been this huge shift within a family, and within the community. One sees that, of course, there are parents who are calling us up now, wanting their daughters to play football. The elected representatives, they call Parcham, and whenever they have some program or some inauguration, they want us to be around, because aligning with us makes them look progressive.
Hmm.
So it has definitely changed. There are more girls playing football. The football academies are now approaching us and saying that, you are an NGO, so why don't you send your girls to us, because we'll take them to professional football. The most you can do is just get them out of the house. So yeah, so we're seeing those kinds of changes now.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of groundwork over the years which has led to this shift in mindset and understanding that football can be not just something that is done on a weekend, but can become a part of a footballer's life, a student's life. And I think the idea of how much, like you mentioned, the collaborations, like how you are being asked by different elected bodies, and in the past you've also collaborated with Puma and Man City, I believe. How much have such collaborations helped the girls into like envisioning their dreams as footballers? Like, do they see that this is something that they can do for the rest of their lives?
Oh yeah. So for us, football was always a means to an end. It was not the ultimate goal, because see, when we started, the girls were all above 17 years, yeah, and 20. So then it was only about play, because like you've never played in your life. You don't have the skill to get selected into a district or anywhere. But we were winning the community tournament, so that kind of really got them motivated, and then got other girls motivated. But today, since we start with much younger girls, when we do our workshops with them on goal setting, and we ask them what their ambitions are, so meaning almost all of them say they want to be a footballer plus a doctor, a footballer plus in the police, a footballer plus whatever. And for some, it is just a footballer. So I think that it's about opening up to the idea that
Mm.
this is also possible, that this can also be a life goal, because till now you never knew that this was also something you could dream of, or not just dream of, but even do in your real life. So yeah, so it has definitely shifted for the girls in how they see this. These collaborations with Man City, like last year we were honored with the first tickets to the under 17 women's cup in India. And all that matters, that they see that there's recognition. The family begins to realize that there's recognition, and so the resistance to letting girls out is somehow, it goes away, that that they
Yeah.
know that this is not just some little thing. But again, I think that's also unfortunate, because I think back to my childhood and say that unless you're able to accomplish something, it's not worth your time,
Mhm.
right? So, and we don't want it to be like that. We want you to be able to play for the sheer joy of experiencing your body, that freedom, that space.
Yeah.
But ठीक है, it helps that वो उसकी बेटी को जाने दे रहे, तो मुझको भी जाने दो, that kind
Mm.
becomes possible.
And there are some of the stories that are mentioned in the book by Parcham about the resistance that girls faced, and then they had to lie to their families. And we have Sabah Parveen's example, like she lied for almost 2 years until she had won the trophies, and then her parents were, accepted and were supportive of her decisions. How much has that changed? Do you think girls are still struggling sometimes with their families? Are there instances where they still have to lie, or hasn't we now has especially the communities and like places like Mumbra where Parcham has been there for a while now? Are girls now more comfortable in sharing those aspirations, and are parents less restrictive?
Meaning some girls still have to lie.
Mhm.
Yeah, but meaning I think it's an inverse ratio now. So
Okay.
earlier when we started with 40 girls, there might have been maybe 8 or 10 who told their parents they were playing, and the rest were all lying. Meaning they said they were going for an English class, and so we were teaching English because we didn't want to teach them to lie. But today, it's very few girls who have to lie. Most of the girls have informed parents. Also because I think we took this to schools. So we began in the first year, since we had no money. We went to the municipal corporation, and the municipal corporation decided it was a good program for their schools, and they hired Sabha Parveen to kind of coach the girls. Since then we also moved to another school in Mumra, which is and they were so happy with the results of these girls playing, because of the way it helped their discipline. It got them to concentrate on their education, that they decided that they will give 10 additional marks to girls who are participating in the football program. And so when things like this happen, it's an incentive for others to send their daughters. So it meaning, so then it also, meaning, if their parents who are thinking, be considering, it helps. Meaning these incentives help. But of course there's still parents who will not allow their daughters to play, and then they have to hide and play. uh, but they manage. So if they get caught, they get beaten up. They still get beaten up. But we've also, meaning, we go to homes, we speak with the parents, we try to tell them. And me, with, now with my gray hair, it becomes a bit easier. I'm the same age as the parents of these girls, and so I can tell them, look at me, meaning, look at my nieces, all that they've done. And I would really like these girls to, accomplish so much in their lives, and it's totally possible. So I think that it's also reassuring parents, which is required at times. uh, and this whole char log thing, no, which I don't know whether it's only peculiar to India, or it's the Asian continent, where this more than the family, it's all the neighbors, the relatives, about who you're concerned. And so then trying to get them to think about the daughter rather than the relatives, so that sometimes helps. Not always, but it has definitely changed. It has changed big time.
I mean, just the fact that you said it's an inverse ratio now is in itself like a big change. To imagine that minority of the girls have to now, hide a part of their, football journey versus majority in the early years. And when it comes to resistance and the log kya kahenge bit, I think that's just like it's a constant term that you hear from different families in different respects about exclusively about women's decisions and women's choices. And I have found this extremely, I think, interesting to note that more and more the girls are able to like redefine that we don't care log kya kahenge. And I think even in the Parcham's journey, that has been the case, that mothers have come out saying that I don't care about what others are going to say. I want my daughter to go forward. And there were, I think, some examples of Parcham organizing matches for the mothers as well. Can you share a bit about that?
Yeah, we realized over time that the mothers had never played, meaning they too, like their daughters, had stopped playing, as soon as pre-puberty, actually. By the time they were 10, they were not allowed to play because they were also married early. And so we thought, let's do this tournament where we invite the mothers to join us. And since they were there, we said, chalo, khelo. And, it rained that day. It rained crazy. And, there was, the ground was muddy and slush. But the mothers hitched their saris and ran and played. And at the time of their lives, there were a few who were, like, no, 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 this is not right. Meaning, and would just stood around, watching as audience. But we realized that they were itching to play. Just that, it was just so difficult for them to get past it. But they so wanted to play. But then we got them to dance towards the end, and everyone danced. So they did this. We also then tried to document what the mothers had to say. So we created a video of, mothers speaking about their daughters playing. And in each of their stories, they speak about the fact that they loved to play, that they were these mischievous women, meaning the mischievous children, who did this, that, and the other, but had to stop playing. And so now they want their daughters to have everything they did. And so, which is why they encourage their daughters to play. They spoke about, the neighbors, saying all kinds of things about their daughters, trying to discourage them, complaining about them to their in-laws, and how they were also handling stuff like this. So I think, yeah, but so in Parcham we realized that we need at least one support at home. at least one person who will stand by the daughter. And so we are trying to then build those relationships. So we do mother daughter meets, we do all kind, meaning we do activities where they will actually engage with each other at an emotional level. So it's not just play, but then they're sharing things about their lives which the daughter didn't know of their growing up. So it helps this kind of bonding, which really helps the daughters even beyond football to the life choices they make.
I was just going to say that I think that kind of work within families can go a very long way. It doesn't just end with football. And it takes me back to the word that you had used earlier about joy. You know, seeking joy and not accomplishment is such a difficult aspect growing up, because it's just how we are born, and perhaps not born, but just raised, that you will be happy if you have these accomplishments in life. You will just be okay, if you kind of, and that's a constant like milestone fatigue that especially girls I feel have. And the idea of joy and the idea of seeking joy and leisure is just so simple yet so difficult to explain. um, have the girls, and I think your team has trained so many girls now across different parts of Mumbai, have the girls started understanding that value more than accomplishment, and have they been able to share it with their families to the extent that they can?
Yeah, I think yeah, the girls know that they want to live, they want to enjoy. So when you come to Parchap as a space, as an office, you'll see all these young people just sitting there and talking. And it doesn't really seem like an office where work gets done. And oftentimes I have to ask, is something happening here? But there's so much surveillance outside, Mariam. It's just crazy that we need young people to behave in a particular way. And if you're a young girl, never mind a woman, the only reason you can be out in a domestic, meaning in a public space, is if you have some domestic duty there. So you're taking your sibling to school, you're going to the market to buy something, you're on your way to college, but it's never to just loiter. And it's always with a purpose that you're meant to be outside. You cannot be seen with the opposite sex, because meaning we've understood sexuality only as very heterosexual. And so meaning any girl with a boy is just not possible. So even families which allow girls to play football, if they see that girl with a boy, meaning in the football, talking to him, that ends their football journey oftentimes. Um, so they come to Parjam, and they find this as a safe space to just be able to sit and talk and be themselves, and they recognize that this is what they want for their children now, if they were to have children. So I think that it's a movement right now. The mothers are letting their daughters play, and the daughters who are now playing are realizing that there's more to life than just responsibility, and this is what life should be about. And there's only so much influence you can with your parents, but the lives you would be able to influence, you would want to influence differently. So the aspiration of what life ought to be has definitely shifted.
Yeah. And it is something that I think happens more and more as we understand how the world around us impacts us. I think within a domestic space, a lot of times women are not negotiating so many things beyond the confines of their home. But when girls step out and when they are interacting with girls from other communities, from other backgrounds, I think socio-political context also starts playing a part. And this is something I'm curious to ask you, that Parcham has very, mindfully created a space where you want to talk about mingling people from different communities, from different religious backgrounds, from girls coming from different religious backgrounds as well. In the climate that we live in today, how has the political situation impacted conversations? Do you see that girls are talking about the way the country is shaping itself? And what have been your observations?
Yeah, no, I mean, for Parcham, this is a really important conversation to have. And so, while we have a football program, we also have other programs that where many of our footballers participate, and sometimes it's people who don't even play football participate. So, we have a citizenship and governance program where we have these conversations about what's happening to our country, who are we, meaning what does the identity of Muslim mean in India, Yeah. So, meaning in the football program, we try to get the Muslims, non-Muslims together without imposing a conversation around difference. So it's just about being there and understanding the similarities. So we like if in the footballers of Parcham Hope, you'll notice that there are these different girls speaking about restrictions, and this one girl says, "हम भैया है इसीलिए हमको shorts पहनने नहीं मिलता है." And there's a girl who says, we are from UP, so we are not allowed. And then the Muslim will say that, कि नहीं मेरे घर में तो ऐसा नहीं करने देते. So it doesn't matter, it's gender which causes so many restrictions. And so so then these are natural conversations which speak more about similarities than differences and get them to bond over that. But in the citizenship program, we started with just Muslims because we wanted this. Because there's this sense, like I said, living in Mumra, there's this whole victimhood of the government is not for us. No matter what happens, no one's going to kind of care for us. There's the CAA which came through, right, and which is targeted at the Muslim minority. Though meaning, of course, there are many Hindus in detention center in Assam, but of course it's projected as such. So we wanted to have these conversations with the Muslim to understand what the Muslim identity means to an Indian citizen, and how we can bring out a secular and a more nuanced understanding of our issues to the world. But over the years, like now, this year, we have a mix of Muslims and non-Muslims in our citizenship program, and they're both able to contribute what's happening to the country, the laws which are being passed. And there's a very nice, very very engaging discussions which have happened through it, and for them to better understand each other. So it's naturally beginning to critique what's not Indian. So beginning to redefine nationalism in many ways. That nationalism is not about hating the other, but nationalism is about understanding the constitution. And so, do you know what the constitution says? And things like that. So it also then gets us to. So the Hindus are also articulating their views on the hijab like the Muslims are. And it's amazing the discussions that these conversations are generating. I feel that it's important for us to have these conversations. Oftentimes we think that we get very these are difficult conversations actually to have, and so we don't want to get into that space where it might break the group. It might kind of it might create trouble for us. So yeah, but it's important because when we have them, it actually strengthens the group, because then there is a solidarity which is political, and when the foundation is based on that understanding, it's much stronger. Then it's not simply because I have to be a good human being, so no matter what that Muslim does, I have to like him or her. It's more than that. It's understanding where they're coming from, and then building a solidarity which is meaningful.
And does that translate into like family conversations as well when the footballers and all go back? Because I think that a lot of times you might be the only person in a, I would say, like a very majoritarian view family.
I think our kids are very smart. They know what to say at home and what not to. So they test waters. They figure how much where it's possible. So then they begin conversations with those who are very meaning who they are closest to in the home sometimes. But then they test and see how much they can push the conversation. Like this, the early this year we had the hijab controversy in Karnataka, and we thought we need to have a conversation around it, not last year actually, the hijab controversy. And then it was a really wonderful debate that we had with both sides, pros and cons, and about religion and what have you. And then we began to talk about the fact that now we see uh, girls who are being held in their arms, like 3-year-old girls and 2-year-old girls who are being made to wear the scarf. So they're wearing a frock, meaning and they are wearing a scarf because it seems right to do. So this one young boy who was in the conversation went back home and took off the scarf of his niece, and his mother was really upset. And yeah, so he realized that okay, this is not the space to have this conversation now. But of course he's understood this, so he's coming back to Parcham and he's talking about it. He's also talking about his family's response to how they understood this conversation around the hijab. It didn't sit too well with them. But in other places, like girls who came to us, meaning even when they sat in the office, they wouldn't take off their hijabs. Meaning there were girls who wouldn't even take off the nose piece, so that just their eyes are visible. And later on, they said this is their choice. They start with this is my choice, and over the years you see that that choice is shifting, right? So it's so one really needs to unpackage the word choice, but also make spaces safe for women to then say that okay, I can shift, meaning
Yeah.
I can move from what my position was without being judged.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know how much within the family, but at least outside spaces which they can control, they're definitely trying to make the change.
And I think you put it very succinctly that choice, the word choice needs to be unpackaged, and with the way we interact with life and the situations and circumstances, that is the essence of what your own choice and your own agency means. You have at any given point in time the complete right to make and shift from the choices you have. As we're talking about the idea of safe space and understanding and discussing conversations that affect us beyond our homes and communities, I'm also thinking about like the current protests that are happening by the female wrestlers, where they're literally taking on the institutional head, and they're trying to make sure that their voices are heard, that the right kind of actions are taken. And again, looking at the larger picture of sportsmanship in India, female athletes in different games and sports. Um, do girls at Parcham think about like what is their role in these conversations? When some of them you said want to be exclusively become footballers. Have those conversations happened, and what has been your observation around them?
So we participated in the protests when they happened. We did a signature campaign around this protest, but meaning we haven't really taken it to the personal level. That what if, because we aren't
Mm.
there yet. We are still a very community organization. We keep hoping that we will register with the district association, but that's not yet happened. So some do go for training to these district associations. They have a very different experience because they're Muslim, so not so much as gender as being Muslim. So that this girl wearing the hijab is coming in here, so then these nasty jokes which get directed towards them. So yeah, so meaning it's at different times, so they deal with it. But we know that so when we started the program, we have a child protection policy which we read out to people, which very clearly states what is and what is not allowed. Earlier we used to have male coaches coming in, and then we always had to have one of us volunteers present on the field while the coach was training, because it was very clear that the coach could not ask for phone numbers of these girls, and if any girl was asked for a number, she had to come back and report to us, and a girl did. So meaning, and then we take action around all of that. So there is this understanding of what is meaning what should not be, and hopefully they will raise their
Mm.
voice. Also, I think that this sport gives you a certain kind of courage, because you've challenged so much in your family and community to get here, that I think that it takes away that fear, meaning some way it kind of lessens the
Mm.
fear. I'm so glad that the wrestlers have spoken out, and so many of them have spoken out, because it helps to know that you needn't take these things lying down. And so I think that they're actually role models for so many other sports women who will be getting into this field. So for us, they are role models for what they are doing, knowing what is at stake, and in spite of that, standing up for what they believe is right. For our girls, I hope that's a lesson that they will take back with them through their lives. But these conversations need to be had. Again, I think that it's all about morality, Mariam. That if we take away the judgment, if we take out the morality, because women are staying quiet because they know they'll get judged. They stay quiet because they know that the precious little freedom they have will be taken away from them for no fault of theirs. So they are also negotiating in when to say what. And if we are able to just make it possible for them to to say, to speak out against all that is wrong without judging them, without punishing them for speaking out, then they would have more confidence to speak out. Sometimes we've realized that they come and
Yeah.
speak to us at Parcham, but not at home. So we've had girls who come and told us about, love going wrong, and of violence, and they expect us to set it right, but it has to be on the terms that the parents cannot know. So yeah, so it's unfortunate that our families, which are supposed to be the safe spaces, are not really the safe spaces.
Yeah. To what you were talking about, that girls know that they'll be the first ones to judge. I think this is what Sakshi Malik also said, that the minor who withdrew her, complaint. She said that all these girls come from difficult backgrounds, from economically weaker sections, and for them this is not something they can take lightly. They can't just file a complaint. And I think when I hear you speak about how the girls are also trying to find safe spaces, knowing that their chance at freedoms are, especially in the early years, very nascent. They're still figuring out how much can they fight for their freedoms. It does become difficult. It can be a very precarious place to be in. I think what Parcham is doing is offering them a chance to take it step by step. You know, and negotiate on these freedoms that we should always have. I'm curious to hear, because you mentioned the male coach thing that you mentioned in one of our early conversations, about how a lot of times the male coaches did not want to train the footballers at Parcham. Have things changed now? And I think now things must have also changed because there are so many young female football coaches trained by Parcham.
Yeah. Yeah, see, when we started Magic Bus, and Magic Bus wanted us to kind of get girls together, wanted us to have a ground, and they would send the coaches. But this being Mumra, and Mumra being a very difficult place to travel to, it's 40 kilometers from the city, and on Sundays you have a mega block, which means the trains don't stop at Mumra. So it's a very difficult journey. So we had coaches coming in for maybe 3 months or less, and then they stopped because they couldn't manage the travel. So that's when the girls began to watch YouTube videos and then design the next day's training and stuff like that. And we did manage to get one coach, but we had to pay twice as much for a coach than others would. uh, we tried to get a woman coach, which was next to impossible, and then we found one, and she quoted such an atrocious amount that we thought, oh my god, so she wanted within a 1 day's training what one would give for the entire month. And so we realized that she didn't really want to be here and come to train probably. So yeah, so male coaches, and when the male coaches came, they thought a girl just kicking ball is enough. So they don't expect too much of women. They don't think women are actually going to go there and make a mark for themselves. So जितना भी सिखाया इस बहुत हो गया इनके लिए, इनको ये बस है. Now we do have coaches who would like to come and train, but the girls don't want them, and they think that these men have too much of an attitude, and they don't really understand women. And that they are very condescending, so they prefer that they coach themselves, they prefer coaching themselves. And of course, meaning because of all of this, we had girls undergoing a training to become coaches, and we have three certified coaches now. One of them is actually looking, meaning I think she's found a job in another city. So yeah, so things like this are happening, and I hope we are able to change this whole coaching scenario, have more young women coming in. We realize that the without training too, the girls who coach the girls coach them much better than certified male coaches, because there's so much passion that the women have, that you have to excel. Again, you have to excel, and so you have to do this. So yeah, I think, but it has shifted. There are many men coaches who now reach out to us and ask if there's a position available.
That says a lot. I think that says a lot about how far has Parcham been able to get the word out about girls wanting to learn football, and this is just not something they want to do as a hobby, but it's something driven by their passion. And in a way, like this sort of hunger for figuring out what does a public space do to them, how do they make it their own. um, And I think as a closing question, I just want to ask you, Sabah, what do you do for fun? You know, you didn't grow up playing sports, but what is your idea of fun, and how do you claim your public space?
Yeah, well, it's really meaning I am the complete opposite of everything I do. I think because I didn't get to do so much, that's why Parcham becomes this space of release where I think it's voyeuristic, and just being able to just see these other girls play and feel so happy about it. So which is why I say that the first day of training is etched in memory, simply because it felt so free. It felt like, oh my god, what have we done, and that this is possible. But I read and I watch a lot of TV, and sometimes I just take an hire an Uber to go for a long drive. So yeah, so those are things, because one needs to also retain some sanity in this mad world. So yeah.
True, very wise words. Thank you so much, Sabah, for coming on Maybe Muslim. It's been a pleasure to speak to you.
Thank you, Mariam. Really, it's been an honor to be here and speaking with you. Thank you so much for this and for taking Parcham's voice to the world.
If you like this episode, please give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. To learn more about Sabah Khan and Parcham, please do check out the notes of this episode. Also, do listen to MBM's other conversations with Annie Sedi, Samira Khan, Nazni Rizvi, among others, who bring a diverse understanding of being an Indian, a Muslim, and everything in between. I'm Mariam Haider. Thank you for listening to Maybe Muslim. I'll be back in a few weeks' time with a new guest. Until then, take care, lots of love, and gratitude.